Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. The night suddenly plunged our house into pitch darkness. The electricity went out, leaving us without light and the comforting coziness of civilization. I groped in the darkness, found my phone, and turned on the flashlight, which only pulled a narrow beam of light from the darkness. Deciding to check what was happening outside, I approached the window. Outside, there stretched a silent and ominous darkness. Our house is located outside the city, surrounded by dense forest. The trees, black against the night sky, looked menacing, their branches like skeletons reaching their bony hands towards the house. The only sound that broke the silence was the rustle of leaves swaying in the wind. Not a single street light, not a single distant glow, only absolute darkness engulfing everything around. Our house is a spacious cottage, once built for a large family, but now serving as a refuge for various people. 3 families, including us, live here. The house is owned by an elderly couple, Nikolai Ivanovich and Maria Petrovna. They are over 70, and their strength is gradually leaving them. This house, once full of life and laughter from their children and grandchildren, has become too large and labor-intensive for them. So they decided to rent out rooms, not only to earn extra income but also to avoid feeling lonely in this huge dwelling. We also live here a young couple who recently moved from the city. We chose this place to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and give our child the opportunity to grow up in the fresh air, closer to nature. Our little one, still unaware of all the terrifying aspects of darkness, slept in his crib, undisturbed in his childlike tranquility. On the other side of the corridor lives another young family, Anna and Sergey. They too recently became parents and were seeking solitude and peace for their newborn. The forest opposite our house has always filled me with unease. There was some incomprehensible force lurking in its depths, impossible to ignore. At night, when the whole street plunged into darkness, strange sounds would emanate from there, causing my heart to skip a beat. Sometimes it was a prolonged howl, resembling a scream. Sometimes it was rustling and crackling, as if someone was pushing through thickets. In those moments I felt an inexplicable fear, as if the forest was trying to communicate something. Once, after a particularly disturbing night, I decided to ask Nikolai Ivanovich and Maria Petrovna about the nature of these sounds. Over dinner, when everyone gathered around the table, I cautiously broached the subject of the strange noises coming from the forest. The old couple exchanged glances, and in their eyes, I saw a shadow of concern. Nikolai Ivanovich, with a heavy sigh, began to speak. His voice was quiet and tense, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear his words. "Our forest is not an easy one," he said, stroking his gray beard. "The locals have always known that it's inhabited by creatures that are best left undisturbed. Those sounds you hear, they're their voices. They warn us of their presence." Maria Petrovna, shaking her head, added, "We've lived here for many years, and we know those who take too much interest in these beings risk being taken by them. The forest seems to draw such people into its darkness, and they disappear without a trace. The best thing to do is to pay no attention to these sounds and not seek their source." Those words deeply unsettled us. Anna and Sergey, sitting across from us, exchanged glances, a mixture of curiosity and fear in their eyes. We young and rational-minded people tend to seek logical explanations for everything happening around us. But on that evening, under the influence of the old couple's story, we felt something ancient and mystical that couldn't be explained. However, curiosity is a powerful thing. In the following days and nights, when the sounds from the forest became particularly loud, I noticed that not only I but also Anna and Sergey were increasingly listening and peering out of the windows. We tried not to discuss it aloud, but every rustle and every howl aroused an irresistible desire in us to uncover the truth, despite the warnings of the old couple. Nevertheless, the words of Nikolai Ivanovich and Maria Petrovna remained in our heads like a dark cloud on the horizon. We understood that we were playing with fire, but we couldn't resist trying to unravel the mystery of the forest, which seemed to lure us with its ominous sounds. After the old couple's story about the forest creatures, the nights became even more sinister. On the evening when I heard the prolonged howl again, I became particularly uneasy. I lay in bed, trying to ignore the growing fear, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. It was a loud, insistent knock, as if someone in desperation was trying to enter. I approached the door and, hesitating a little, cracked it open. Our neighbor Oleg stood on the threshold, his face contorted with fear and worry. "Please help me," he said anxiously. "My son is missing. I heard his scream, and now I can't find him. Help me find him." Something in his voice and the strange moonlight falling on his face made me wary. The words of the old couple about creatures capable of taking on any form to lure people out of their homes flashed in my memory. I stared intently at Oleg, trying to understand if he was genuine or if he was one of those entities from the forest. My hesitation didn't escape Oleg's notice. "Don't you believe me?" he asked, his voice trembling. But before I could respond, Nikolai Ivanovich appeared behind me. The old man cast a glance at Oleg and quietly said, "Don't go out. It might be a trap." Seeing Nikolai Ivanovich, Oleg stepped back, his expression changing into something ominously elusive. Suddenly he vanished into the darkness, leaving us in eerie silence. That same night, I insisted that Nikolai Ivanovich and Maria Petrovna tell us the whole truth about the creatures in the forest. After much persuasion, the old couple relented. They explained that the forest creatures could take on human form and use people's fears and desires to lure them into their traps. Those who uncover their secrets are in particular danger, as the creatures begin to see them as a threat and actively pursue them. When the story was finished, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. We all understood the knowledge we had gained would not bring us peace. Now the creatures from the forest knew that we were aware of them. We could no longer simply ignore the sounds and hope they would disappear. Every night, every rustle became evidence that the forest was watching us. Anna and Sergei, sitting nearby, looked stunned. They gazed at the old couple with undisguised horror. We all understood that our curiosity had led us to the epicenter of a sinister mystery that now threatened not only our peace but also our lives. We agreed to be extremely cautious and always stick together to protect each other. But deep down, each of us felt that the forest would not leave us in peace. And now, with the secret revealed, we were all bound by an invisible thread to those dark forces that lurked among the trees, awaiting their moment. The old couple told us about the dark pages of the forest's history, which were never recorded in books. They claimed that many years ago, satanic rituals were conducted in the forest, attracting people thirsty for power and wealth. These rituals penetrated deep into the forest, where bonfires were lit and demons were summoned. Once, a child from a neighboring house disappeared. The parents searched for him for days, but found no trace. This case became the cornerstone on which the legend of the forest, shrouded in satanic secrets and dark forces, began. With each missing person, hysteria grew, and fear of the forest became increasingly insurmountable. Over time, disappearances began to occur more and more frequently. Before each disappearance, a terrifying howl and cry were heard, emanating from the depths of the forest. It was impossible to trace the missing individuals. They simply vanished into the night, as if consumed by darkness. But the culmination of horror was the disappearance of a woman from our own house. She was searched for weeks, scouring every corner, but her body was never found. The only thing that was discovered were tracks leading straight into the forest, as if something or someone had led her to its gloomy sanctuary. This last disappearance was the final straw. Residents, filled with fear and horror, began to abandon these places, leaving their homes and trying to forget the nightmare that lurked in the darkness of the forest. Those who remained lived in constant fear, their lives filled only with the hope that they would not become the next victims of the mystical forces that slumbered in the forest. We listened to these stories, filling our minds with horrifying images of what was happening. Now we understood that our house, surrounded by the dark forest, stood on a dangerous edge, where every whisper of the wind and every rustle of leaves could be a harbinger of something sinister. The old couple pleaded with us to heed their words, warning that the creatures from the forest could infiltrate our world, assuming familiar forms. They insisted never to open the door to strangers, even if they appeared to be familiar faces. Otherwise, they might drag you into their dark depths of the forest. The elders warned that now that people knew about the creatures, they became their target. We, young and rational, laughed at the old folks' tales. How could anyone believe in such nonsensical horrors? But the theory of creatures from the forest taking on human form seemed to us something from the realm of fantasy. At night, I was awakened by vague sounds, which seemed ghostly and indefinite. First, there was a woman's cry, which began to turn into a terrifying howl, piercing the silence of the night. Both Anna and I woke up, confused and filled with anxiety. And then something happened that made our hearts skip a beat. A sudden knock on the door pierced the night silence, as if someone was insistently trying to enter. I approached the door, listening intently to every sound. My heart pounded, trying to break free from my chest. "Who's there?" I shouted, but there was only a grim silence in response. Our neighbors, Anna and Sergei, also heard these strange sounds and, as if possessed by indescribable fear, clung to each other, trying to protect each other from something unknown and terrifying. Anna and I exchanged glances, and in that moment, I realized that we couldn't ignore the old folks' words. Suddenly, all their stories, mixed with the mystical sounds of that night, seemed like undeniable truth. Whether it was reality or illusion, something dark and ominous was truly here, in the dark depths of the forest, ready to hunt in our world. The night enveloped our house in its darkness, and only the sounds of strange howling broke the silence. The knock on the door caught my attention, and as I approached the door, my wife Alina's voice came from behind it. She claimed to have woken up from the howling and couldn't find me. But something in her insistence made me pause. "Wait, Alina," I said, restraining the anxiety in my voice. "Why are you so insistent on me opening the door? We know that in the forest, it's dangerous there." But her pleas continued persistently, as if she was sowing fear and anxiety. Suspicion made me press my hand against the door, refusing to open it, despite my wife's pleas. Morning light streamed into the room, painting everything in soft shades. I entered the kitchen, where I saw Alina, busy preparing breakfast. Her face expressed calmness, but something from last night still troubled my mind. "Alina, did you hear strange sounds last night?" I asked, trying to find confirmation of my suspicions. She paused her activities and met my gaze with a puzzled look. "Yes, I heard them," she admitted. "They frightened me. I woke up and couldn't find you next to me." "But you didn't come to me?" I asked again, feeling the pieces of the puzzle come together. "No, of course not," she replied with confusion in her voice. "I thought you woke me up by knocking on the door." My doubts intensified when I heard her words. Something didn't add up. "But I didn't knock on your door," I exclaimed, feeling that this misunderstanding held much more than just a random knock on the door. We exchanged frightened glances, realizing that something stranger and more inexplicable than just scary sounds from the forest had happened last night. The creatures lurking in its depths seemed to be playing their terrifying game with us, deceiving and confusing us in the web of their dark intrigues. Debates and puzzlement filled our conversations the morning after the strange events of the previous night. I suggested that these could be creatures from the forest, as the old folks warned us. My idea elicited only laughter and mockery from Oleg. "Seriously, do you really believe in this nonsense?" he asked, shaking his head with irony. Alina, on the other hand, looked at me with disbelief, her eyes expressing a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. She was inclined to believe in rational explanations, rejecting the idea that dark forces could intervene in our lives. Despite Oleg's skepticism, Alina and I began to believe more and more in the old folk stories. These unsettling events awakened something ancient and inexplicable within us, causing us to look at the world from a new perspective. The night was dark and gloomy, as if the forest surrounding our house was coming alive with its dark forces. I heard strange sounds again, creaking floorboards and scratching on the glass. My heart pounded harder, filling my mind with a storm of fear. I got out of bed, straining to listen to the sounds, which seemed to emanate from the depths of the forest. Alina lay next to me, her face reflecting the same anxiety as mine. We exchanged glances, and in that moment, I understood the dark forces of the forest were real, and they were closer than we thought. This night, filled with sounds of fear and the unknown, reinforced our decision to stay together and protect each other from the dark forces lurking in the shadow of the forest. Our belief in the old folks' stories grew stronger with each piercing scream and each mysterious rustle, penetrating through our windows and filling our hearts with fear of the unknown. In the evening, cries and howls echoed again, mixed with unknown sounds that made our hearts skip a beat with fear. Then, suddenly the light went out, plunging our house into darkness. The knock on the door sounded again, but this time it was Oleg's voice, pleading for help in finding his missing son. But my mind was gripped by fear. I could imagine how a creature from the forest could take on the form of our neighbor, trying to lure me out of the house. I stood at the door, hesitating, torn between the desire to help and the fear of the unknown. Morning brought a new blow to our hearts. Antoshka, the son of our neighbors, had disappeared without a trace. Oleg, with a heavy heart, confessed that the boy had spoken of how a strange woman called him to come out of the house, but he refused. This statement filled us with horror. Oleg expressed his fears, suggesting that Antoshka might have still decided to escape through the window, yielding to the enticing calls of a stranger, and was abducted by those same dark creatures lurking in the depths of the forest. Heavy silence enveloped our conversation, filling it with horror and helplessness. We understood that our world was entangled in the web of dark intrigues, and that every step, every decision, was now permeated with fear and the unknown. Carrying grief and fear in our hearts, Oleg and I set out into the forest to search for the missing Antoshka. My legs trembled with fear, and every rustle in the leaves made my heart skip a beat. But we kept moving forward, our only weapon being our determination to bring the boy back to safety. The footprints on the ground led us deeper into the forest, where light barely penetrated through the dense tree branches, creating a creepy atmosphere of the unknown. I felt fear gripping my heart, but we couldn't stop. Too much was at stake. Suddenly I lost sight of Oleg, and my cries disappeared into the infinity of the dark forest. Alone, I continued my path, praying that nothing would strike me in this dark void. And then I saw her. Alina's body lay in the grass, her eyes wide open with horror. I ran to her, my heart pounding in my chest, as if trying to escape from the dark labyrinth. Her face expressed an unspeakable terror of death, as if she had seen something that had deprived her of her sanity. It was obvious that she had been strangled. Someone or something had taken her life, leaving me with the dark secrets of this place and unanswered questions in my mind. With trembling hands, I pulled out my mobile phone from my pocket and dialed the police, but despair filled my voice. Dark forces lurked in this forest, and I realized that the struggle was only beginning. Horrified to the core, I saw movement in the bushes. My reaction was instantaneous, and without hesitation I turned and ran back to the house, making my way through the dark undergrowth of the forest. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. Fear consumed me, making me forget everything except the desire to save my own life. I didn't look back, even though the darkness of the forest pursued me, as if it were alive and ready to swallow me whole. Returning to the house, I was relieved to have escaped the clutches of the forest, although fear still gripped my chest like a bird in a cage. But my horrors only intensified when I saw Oleg, whose face was contorted with terror. Learning of his wife's death, he rushed back into the forest, plunging blindly into its dark depths. Soon his cries rang out, filling the night with horror and despair. My heart ached with pain and fear. I understood that Oleg had become the next victim of the creatures from the forest, like many before him. The dark secrets of this place, hidden in the dark depths of the forest, lurked around us, ready to engulf our souls in its bottomless darkness. I felt defenseless against these powerful forces, and only one thought echoed in my mind: I would never return to this cursed forest. With determination in my heart, I began to gather my belongings. Every item I picked up felt like a symbol of liberation from the shackles of this cursed place. I strode resolutely around the room, taking with me everything that could be useful in my new endeavor. My thoughts were filled with the desire to leave and forget everything that had happened here. I didn't want to see this dark forest anymore or hear its ominous sounds. My only goal was freedom, and I was willing to do whatever it took to achieve it. But just as I was almost ready to leave, Irina Mikhailovna, one of the longtime residents, suddenly appeared before me. Her eyes were full of warning, and her words rang like alarm bells in my mind. "Don't leave, son," she said, reaching out with trembling hands. "Now you belong to them. They are hungry and won't stop until they get what they want." My eyes widened with horror. "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling fear gripping my heart. "You've seen what they're capable of," Irina Mikhailovna continued. "They don't bother us, the old folks, because we're no longer of interest to them. But you're still young and strong. They won't let you go so easily." Her words made me pause. I realized that my escape could be deadly, but I was determined to continue my journey despite all warnings. My thirst for freedom outweighed my fear of the dark forces of the forest. My heart froze with horror when I saw the old man Alexei opening the door, letting the dark forces of the forest into the house. I realized it was a deadly trap, and my only hope of survival lay in escape. Without hesitation, I rushed to the window, ignoring the agonizing screams and cries behind me. The entities, taking on the form of my neighbor Alina, tried to deceive me, but I didn't give them a chance. My instinct for self-preservation overcame all fears, and I leaped out of the window, leaving behind the house cursed by darkness and death. The pursuit of freedom finally seemed to be over as I drove out of the accursed forest. A sense of relief washed over me, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart froze in horror. In the back seat, I saw a creature taking on the form of a child. It smiled at me with a toothless grin, its eyes filled with evil and a thirst for revenge. Before I could react, it pounced on me, its claws piercing through my skin, its teeth tearing into flesh. My car filled with the sounds of clicking teeth and rending flesh as I fought for my life in a mad world of nightmare and horror. In the final moments before losing consciousness, I realized that the curse of this place had enveloped me, and my fate was sealed in the dark depths of the forest, where evil reigned supreme. In modern society, there is a deep skepticism towards paranormal phenomena. Any stories about encounters with ghosts, visions, or unexplained events are often met with ridicule or outright denial. Those who share such stories risk facing social condemnation and stigmatization. At best, they are considered dreamers. At worst, they are seen as dangerous individuals who need medical help. This leads many to remain silent about their experiences to avoid humiliation and isolation. Society finds it easier to ignore such phenomena rather than try to explore and understand them, so as not to disrupt the familiar picture of the world. I share my story despite the fear of being ridiculed or misunderstood. I hope there are people ready to take it seriously and consider that there are things we still cannot explain. Last fall, the city plunged into its usual grayness, and I sank into a deep depression. The gray walls of buildings, the monotonous hum of cars, and the endless streams of people created a sense of suffocation, like a haze that prevented me from breathing fully. Life in the city seemed monotonous, devoid of bright colors and emotions. Together with two loyal friends, we decided it was time to change something. My friends and I had a unique tradition. Every weekend we would go out into nature. This was our way of escaping the city hustle and engaging in something more pleasant and useful. Our adventures surrounded by nature became our remedy for stress and depression. One day, when the autumn sadness became unbearable, we decided to take an especially bright and memorable trip. Instead of our usual short outings to nearby forests, we planned a real nature vacation. We chose the Ural Mountains, majestic and beautiful. They seemed to us the perfect place for rest and restoring our peace of mind. Our plans included everything: hiking in the mountains, fishing in mountain lakes, gathering mushrooms and berries, and cozy campfires under the starry sky in the evenings. We were set for adventure and discovery, ready to immerse ourselves in the world of nature and forget all our problems and worries. And so the time for our journey arrived. We packed all the necessary things, stocked up on provisions, and set off. The road was long, but every kilometer brought us closer to our goal: liberation from city grayness and worries. When we stepped out of the car at the top of the mountain, our hearts sang with joy. Around us stretched a stunning landscape: endless forests covered in golden leaves, and in the distance, snow-covered mountain peaks. The whole weekend we enjoyed the freedom and beauty of nature. We walked through the forests, gathered mushrooms, fished, and watched falling stars. Every moment was filled with joy and tranquility, and we forgot about city problems and stress. When it was time to return home, our hearts were full of gratitude for this unforgettable rest. We realized that our tradition of going out into nature was not just entertainment, it was our way to recharge with energy and inspiration to face city life and its challenges again. A Friday evening in the bar marked the beginning of our unforgettable adventure. Sitting at a table, surrounded by friends and the atmosphere of fun, we discussed ideas for the upcoming weekend. While the city lights illuminated the street outside, we dreamed of adventures surrounded by wild nature. After long debates and exchanging ideas, we made a decision to go to a new, unexplored direction suggested by our acquaintances. They promised that we would find breathtaking, pristine nature and secluded spots where we could enjoy peace and quiet under the starry sky. Taking another last backpack and making sure we had everything we needed, we gathered on Friday after work and headed to the car, eager for adventure. With lively music and friends' jokes, we felt our excitement growing in anticipation of the upcoming journey. In the trunk of our car were tents, warm clothes, and, of course, lots of meat for kebabs, because what could be better than a cozy campfire under the open sky and the aroma of freshly grilled kebabs? Time flew by, and we approached our new destination. Serpentine roads led us through dense forests and picturesque valleys, and in the distance, our goal already stretched out the place where we were promised beautiful views and a magical atmosphere of nature. When we finally reached our destination, our eyes were dazzled by the splendor of the surrounding landscape. We stopped at the edge of the forest, where a magnificent view of the mountains covered in forests and soaked in fresh air opened up. With anticipation, we unpacked our tents, made a fire, and started cooking kebabs. Around us, the night was already starting to thicken, calling us to cozy conversations under the starry sky. Thus began our exciting adventure in a new, remote direction, where every moment was filled with the anticipation of new discoveries and adventures. We were ready to immerse ourselves in the world of nature and enjoy everything it could offer us. The next morning, when the first rays of the sun broke through the veil of fog, we gathered with our friends to begin our unforgettable adventure. All the necessary things were packed into the car tents: sleeping bags, food and water supplies, warm clothes, and other essential items. We were preparing to meet the uncharted expanses of nature, ready for any twists of fate. When everything was ready, we got into the car and set off. The road promised to be long, but we were full of determination and enthusiasm. For 3 to 4 hours, we moved forward, enjoying the views outside the window, playing cards, and watching movies to pass the time. Our spirits were high, and we eagerly awaited the adventures that lay ahead. Upon arriving at the site, we left the car in a clearing by the forest and began preparing for our hiking adventures. The area was remote and inaccessible by car, so we had to proceed on foot. We packed our backpacks, checked our footwear, and took the necessary supplies for the day. The excitement before the journey grew even stronger as we stood at the edge of the forest, ready to embrace the atmosphere of nature. Our path began with soft trails winding through the woods. We walked slowly, savoring every moment, every smell, and every sound around us. Birds chirped in the treetops, and leaves rustled under our feet. Gradually, the forest became denser, the trails narrower and more winding. We climbed hills and descended into valleys, always moving towards the promised views of pristine nature. Our goal was not far, and every step brought us closer to our dream. When we finally emerged into an open space, a majestic view of mountains covered with green forests and shrouded in light mist unfolded before us. We stood still, marveling at this beauty, which seemed unreal and magical. We paused for a moment to enjoy the scene, then continued on our way, full of determination and enthusiasm to explore this amazing natural world before us. Our hearts were full of joy and delight, and we were ready for any adventures that awaited us. The surrounding nature was indeed impressive. We stood at the edge of the forest, feeling like part of something much greater and more powerful than just a group of travelers. Imagine incredible mountains covered with dense forests, not a single trace of human presence, only the beauty and wildness of nature. It was a place one could only dream of, little explored, far from the city's hustle, and filled with mysterious allure. Our acquaintances assured us that this was a safe place. Jack, our guide, knew these areas like the back of his hand and claimed that we could be confident in our safety. And this was confirmed by the fact that during our entire journey, we did not meet a single person, only pure, wild nature in its beauty and untouched state. During our rest, as we enjoyed the pleasant warm breeze, Steve suddenly discovered something unusual. He pointed to a large cave hidden in the shadow of the mountain, and we all got up to take a closer look. The cave looked imposing and mysterious. Its dark corners evoked a sense of excitement and curiosity, and we couldn't resist the temptation to explore it further. Despite the gloomy atmosphere and the silence around us, which seemed to hang in the air, we decided to take the risk and enter the cave. We checked our flashlights and gear, convincing ourselves that everything would be fine. We descended into the cave and immediately felt the cold envelop us. The flashlight beams illuminated the dark walls and ceiling, creating strange shadows and reflections. Our footsteps echoed loudly in the void as we moved forward, driven by curiosity and excitement. The path inside the cave was long and difficult, but we finally reached a large hall adorned with incredible stalactites and stalagmites. It was a true gift of nature, hidden from human eyes and accessible only to those who dared to go beyond the ordinary. We paused for a moment to enjoy this beauty, then continued our journey deeper into the cave, not knowing what else might await us in this mysterious underground world. After setting up camp and preparing food, our conversation began to take a new direction. One of us suggested exploring the cave we had discovered earlier. For a moment, I felt a sense of anxiety. The idea seemed too risky. I tried to dissuade my friends from this idea, warning them of potential dangers, but they were persistent. And in the end, I agreed. Strong curiosity prevailed over everything. We took flashlights and first aid kits to be ready for any surprises and set off in search of new adventures. Crossing to the other side of the river, we approached the entrance to the cave. I felt mixed emotions. Fear and excitement fought for dominance. But in the end, curiosity won, and we entered. The cave was dark and eerie, like a living being hiding its secrets in its depths. Our flashlights illuminated only a small portion of this gloomy abode, and we moved forward, determined to explore every corner of it. But something was wrong. The first thing we noticed was a strange smell of burning lingering in the air. Our initial assumptions that it was the smell of a campfire quickly turned out to be wrong. We were still too far from the cave entrance for that to be possible. The silence in the cave was so deep that we could only hear our own footsteps and breathing. Yet, something felt off. For some reason, I felt tense, as if something sinister awaited us in the darkness. We resolutely moved forward, but our hearts beat faster with tension and fear. What would we find in this cave, and what lay hidden in its depths? This question became a mystery we were ready to unravel, despite all the dangers that might lie ahead. When we emerged from the cave, we were shocked by what we saw. Apparently, we were in the same place where our camp had been, but the surroundings had changed beyond recognition. What we saw looked like a scene from a nightmare: a dry river devoid of water, an absence of vegetation, and the sun hidden behind a gray haze. Our world had turned into something strange and grim, as if we had entered another dimension where an atmosphere of mystery and threat reigned. We exchanged frightened glances, not understanding how this could have happened or what to do next. In this new, gloomy, and empty world, everything around seemed gray and lifeless. The trees were stripped of leaves, and the river was dry, leaving only deserted banks. Our hearts sank with horror at the grim scene unfolding before us. Jack, usually so calm and rational, expressed his surprise, not understanding what was happening. But Steve, despite all the oddities, suggested we continue exploring the area. We were perplexed by his determination, but not wanting to stay in this lifeless world, we agreed to move forward. Our further walk was filled with tension and uncertainty. We walked in silence, each of us consumed by our thoughts and fears. Despite the strange and inexplicable changes in the nature around us, we were determined to find out what was happening and how we could return to our normal world. Realizing the danger and strangeness of this place, Jack and I convinced Steve to turn back. We understood that staying in this lifeless world for too long could only exacerbate our problems. But when we decided to return to the cave to find our way out, we discovered that we couldn't find it. We were lost in this grim and empty forest, disoriented and with no idea how to get back to our starting point. Trying to find our way back, we realized we were lost. The usual guides, the stars, and signs we expected to see were impossible to discern due to the gray haze covering the sky. Our group felt a growing sense of panic and confusion. Despite Jack's attempts to calm the situation and make sense of what was happening, we all felt we were in a hopeless situation. We continued wandering through the lifeless forest, and every step into this grim world deepened our sense of loss and despair. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, and we couldn't find any sign that we were on the right path. With each passing minute, our condition worsened. Our conversations became quieter, and our steps heavier. Inside me grew a sense of hopelessness, but I couldn't afford to lose hope. We had to find a way out of this nightmare, no matter how difficult it was. As we grew increasingly disoriented and unsuccessfully tried to find our way back, Jack decided to use the compass, hoping it would help us navigate. However, when he took out the compass, we were stunned by what we saw. The compass needle was spinning erratically, as if influenced by some external force. This could indicate the presence of an anomalous magnetic field in this area, or even that we were in an anomalous zone where ordinary tools didn't work. This discovery only heightened our sense of helplessness. We were left with our own thoughts and fears, in a desperate situation with no clear indications of where to go next. Suddenly, Steve looked off to the side and stopped in his tracks. I followed his gaze and noticed a human figure among the trees. The figure was clad in dirty rags, its features lost in the shadows. "Hey, who are you?" Steve shouted, but the stranger did not respond. He stood still, as if freezing us with his silence. This alarmed and irritated us. In this strange world full of mysteries and dangers, our first impression was not a good one. We were on guard and ready for any development, but the stranger continued to stand silently, as if frozen in time. Hoping he might be the key to our salvation, we approached him, ready to ask questions and find out what was happening in this strange world we found ourselves in. Jack, hoping for dialogue, cautiously approached the mysterious stranger and tried to speak to him. But before he could say a word, the stranger suddenly struck Jack and ran off. We froze for a moment in surprise, but impulsive Steve immediately dashed after him, despite the obvious danger. Shouting at Steve and trying to stop him was useless. He had already disappeared into the forest, chasing the stranger. We hurried after Steve, hoping to catch up with him and convince him to return. The forest became denser, and every step was accompanied by ominous sounds, heightening our anxiety. Finally, we emerged into a clearing where we discovered something horrifying. Before us stood a stone with a hole in the middle, surrounded by human remains scattered around. Bones, partially decayed bodies, and tattered clothes all indicated that someone had been systematically killing people and piling their bodies in this place. The ghastly sight made our hearts stop in horror. Immediately, hundreds of questions arose in my mind. Who could have committed such cruel acts? And what kind of anomalous place had we entered? Steve, despite the shock, slowly approached the remains, trying not to disturb them. We were all on the verge of panic, but understood that we needed to keep our composure to understand what was happening and find a way out of this situation. Jack, shaking off the impact of the blow, finally spoke. "We need to be very careful. This place is clearly dangerous, and we must stick together." His words sounded confident, but fear was evident in his eyes. We stood in the clearing, surrounded by silent witnesses to someone's cruelty, realizing that our presence here was no coincidence. We had to find answers and, most importantly, find a way back to our world before it was too late. Steve suddenly vanished, leaving the two of us alone in this eerie place. Jack and I realized that the situation had become even more dangerous. The clearing with human remains instilled horror in us, and gradually we understood that we were in the habitat of ancient evil. Around us, a menacing silence thickened, disrupted only by our accelerating heartbeats. Panicked, Jack began to shout, hoping to find Steve. "Steve, where are you?" But there was only silence in response. I felt fear gradually paralyze me. We were alone in this strange, dark world, and no one could help us. Unexpectedly, a slender silhouette emerged from the depths of the forest. It was a humanoid creature with long, disproportionately long limbs. Its movements were unnatural, as if each step caused it pain. As it approached, we saw its eyes empty, lifeless black voids. Seeing this creature, we realized that we were facing true evil. With horror and panic engulfing us, we fled without looking back. The forest around us turned into a labyrinth, and every step we took was accompanied by the sounds of the approaching monster. Its heavy breathing and the rustle of its long limbs created a sense that it would soon catch up to us. We ran, ignoring any obstacles in our path. Branches whipped across our faces, bushes snagged our clothes, but adrenaline drove us forward. Our hearts pounded in our chests, our breath became erratic, and fear for our lives made us run even faster. Every sound in the forest seemed ominous, and every movement of the shadows felt like a threat. We didn't know how much time had passed as we ran, but fear and the instinct for self-preservation propelled us onward. We hoped only for one thing: to escape this nightmare, return to our world, and never again encounter this evil. Our escape was spontaneous and desperate, but within each of us burned a small spark of hope. We believed that despite all the horrors, we could find a way out and see the sunlight again in our familiar world. We ran as fast as we could, but the forest around us grew denser and forgave no mistakes. Suddenly, Jack stumbled over a root and fell to the ground with a cry. I rushed to him, but upon lifting him, I realized he had suffered a serious injury. His leg was mangled, and he couldn't continue moving. As I tried to figure out what to do, a small boy emerged from the trees. His appearance was unexpected and frightening, but in his eyes I saw determination and knowledge. "You need to hide," he said calmly yet insistently. "There's no helping him anymore. If you stay, you'll die too." I hesitated, not wanting to leave Jack, but the boy grabbed my hand and pulled me toward a dense thicket. "Hurry," he cried, and understanding the gravity of the situation, I followed him, leaving Jack lying on the ground. We took cover in the thick bushes, which offered a view of the clearing where Jack remained. My heart raced in my chest, and I felt cold sweat trickling down my spine. The boy whispered softly, "Don't move, don't make a sound." From the darkness of the forest emerged the creature, thin and horrifying, with long limbs and empty black eyes. It moved toward Jack, whose attempts to stand were futile. The creature drew closer, and I felt everything inside me freeze with terror. The monster attacked Jack with wild fury. His cries were unbearable, and I bit my lip to keep from screaming along with him. The boy held onto my hand tightly, his eyes filled with horror and pain. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I prayed for the creature not to notice us. I prayed for salvation, for it to be just a nightmare from which we could wake up. But reality was ruthless. Jack was dying before our eyes, and we couldn't do anything. When it was over, the creature surveyed the clearing, as if searching for its next victim. We held our breath, not moving or making a sound. I closed my eyes and continued to pray, hoping it wouldn't notice us. Time stretched endlessly until the creature finally left, leaving us in eerie silence. We were left alone in this terrifying world, understanding that survival depended on every step we took. Jack was dead, and we needed to find a way out so his death wouldn't be in vain. After the creature left, the boy cautiously led me out of our hiding spot. "Follow me," he whispered, and we ran through the forest, heading toward the cave from which we had once emerged. The night was dark and frightening, but the boy confidently led me, as if he knew every path. We reached the cave, and the boy, introducing himself as Jason, explained that this place was a gateway between worlds. His voice was quiet, but each word resonated in my mind. "This cave is a portal to another dimension. Here, a malevolent demon reigns, hunting the souls of people. It lures people into its world and keeps them here." I looked at Jason with horror and astonishment, hardly believing my ears. "But how can we escape from here?" I asked, grasping for our last hope. "We can return through the cave," he replied, pointing to the dark passage. "But we need to be careful. The demon will be watching us." As we approached the cave, Jason stopped and looked me straight in the eyes. "There's something else I need to tell you," he began, his voice trembling. "I and the other people you've met here, their souls caught by the demon. We can't return to your world." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I'm so sorry, Jason," I whispered, not knowing what else to say. Jason continued, "I need you to deliver a message to my uncle. Tell him he's not to blame, and that I will always love my family." His voice was filled with pain and longing, and I understood how important those words were to him. "I promise," I replied, feeling the weight of those words on my shoulders. "I will deliver this message to him." We entered the cave, and its darkness engulfed us. I felt Jason holding my hand, leading me through the gloom. Eventually, we emerged on the other side and found ourselves back in our world. The sun was shining brightly, and the forest looked as we remembered it, alive and full of life. But Jason was not with me. He remained in that dreadful world, sacrificing himself so that I could return. I returned home and found Jason's uncle. Delivering the boy's words to him, I saw tears streaming down his cheeks. It wasn't easy, but I knew Jason would always be with him, albeit in a different form. Now, whenever I think of that terrifying adventure, I remember Jason's courage and his love for his family. His story and sacrifice will never be forgotten, and his words serve as a constant reminder of the power of love and loyalty. The fate of the main character unfolded against the roar of engines and the smell of hot asphalt, in a world where every corner of the city could become a new challenge or adventure. 15 years ago, when he was still a young and full of life guy, every day brought incredible opportunities and excitement, as if each moment teetered on the edge between adrenaline and carefree abandon. His story began with a gleaming Ford Focus gifted to him by his parents on his 18th birthday. This car was not just a means of transportation but also a symbol of freedom and independence. The main character reveled in his youth, aided by his friends Sasha, Misha, and Artem. Sasha was a devoted fan of motorsports. Although his car looked like an ordinary domestically produced model, under the hood lay a powerful engine ready to experience adrenaline on the road. He always knew how to floor it and enjoy the speed, whether it was drag racing or just a fast ride through the city. Together with his friends, the main character organized races and adventures on the city streets, being cautious yet full of determination. They explored every corner of the city as if it were their personal track, where every turn could present a new challenge. Youth, freedom, and unrestrained fun filled the air, creating an unforgettable atmosphere of adventure. Misha was the one who added intellect and erudition to the group. He was attractive and charming, always bringing something new and interesting to their conversations. Artem, though quiet, added a special mood to their gatherings with his talent on the guitar. Together, they formed an incomparable team, each contributing something of their own, creating memorable moments and stories. And though time marched on, and the main character's life took new turns, those memories of carefree youth and unforgettable adventures always stayed with him, like bright marks on the asphalt, reminding him that life is full of possibilities and adventures if only one is ready for them. Evenings on the dead-end road on the outskirts of the city became special moments for the friends. Here, under the glow of streetlights, they created their own little world, where they could relax from worries and enjoy each other's company. The road stretched into nowhere, adding to its mystery and allure. Beyond the hustle and bustle of the city, here they felt free. Sometimes music played, sometimes they simply conversed, and sometimes they pursued their favorite activities. These moments became bastions of friendship and mutual understanding. They witnessed sunsets and sunrises, watched as stars lit up the night sky, creating an atmosphere of magic and mystery. The dead-end road led to an elite cottage settlement, which was in the plans of the city authorities for expansion and infrastructure development. This added a special flavor and interest to the place, as they could witness the changes happening around them. Sasha's dreams of tuning his car were understandable and captivating. Installing a 2JZ engine from a Toyota Mark II into his 7 could turn it into a true road monster, providing high acceleration characteristics and unprecedented power. But along with this came questions about the technical feasibility of such a project. Discussions between Sasha and Misha became battlegrounds of ideas, where each defended their point of view. Misha, possessing a more practical mind, raised questions about cost, installation complexity, and possible component compatibility issues. All of this made the discussion more interesting and substantive, opening up new horizons for their motorsport dreams. In those times, when there were few cameras on the roads, the city streets became arenas for unrestrained fun and adventures. For the main character and his friends, this was a period of freedom and carefreeness when they could enjoy speed and thrill without worrying about cameras and possible fines. In this world shrouded in the night's cloak, they felt like true kings of the road, ready for any adventures that the city streets could offer them. Despite their mischief and fun, the friends made an effort not to create dangerous situations on the road. They understood that their reckless actions could have serious consequences not only for themselves but also for other road users. Therefore, even when the thrill compelled them to take risks, they always kept themselves in check and tried to prevent potential hazards. Their evening strolls and nighttime races were filled with excitement and adrenaline, but at the same time, they always remembered about safety and responsibility. It was this approach that allowed them to maintain a balance between thrill and reason, preserving their impeccable reputation with themselves and those around them. Artem, veering towards the tree line, unexpectedly stumbled upon something strange and mysterious, a homemade grave cross. This discovery made him freeze in place, his heart beating faster. He slowly approached the cross, feeling as if he were in a scene from a horror movie, and suddenly realized that he had to share his discovery with the rest of his friends. As the friends approached, their eyes were also drawn to this mysterious artifact. The grave was unusual, made of 2 large dry sticks tied together with twine and a small mound of loose soil. There were no informative signs or plaques that could reveal the secret of this place. The air was filled with a sense of the unknown and mysterious, as if a mysterious aura hung around, causing hearts to beat faster. The friends exchanged glances, as if trying to read each other's minds. What was this grave? Who could have created it? Questions swirled in their heads, and the atmosphere of tension and excitement became increasingly palpable. But one thing was clear: they couldn't just leave this enigma unanswered. Perhaps they were tasked with unraveling the mystery of this place and restoring the peaceful tranquility to this mysterious grave. The initial reaction of the friends to Artem's unexpected discovery was a mixture of surprise, fear, and interest. They stood there, bewildered, as if suddenly finding themselves in a scene from some mysterious movie. But soon surprise and fear gave way to jokes and sarcasm. It was their way of coping with the unusual situation, bringing lightness at a moment when hearts were beating faster than usual. Maybe someone buried their pet. Misha laughed, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere. Yeah, judging by the size of the grave, it must have been a very large hamster, Sasha added ironically. They laughed, but deep inside they felt a slight tremor. Who knows what could be hiding under that mound of soil? Among the laughter and jokes were also sarcastic speculations, which sometimes evoked brief, eerie moods. Maybe it's not a pet, but something else. A little person, or even a child, Artem said, and the friends' gazes instantly became serious. For a moment, tension hung in the air, as if this joke had stumbled upon something much more serious and grim. But quickly they switched back to lightness and carelessness. Whatever was hiding under this mysterious grave, they decided not to think about it at that moment. Jokes and laughter were their salvation from incomprehensible feelings and thoughts, giving them some semblance of normalcy in this strange world of mysteries and secrets. When Artem noticed the edge of a dirty green cloth sticking out of the ground near the grave cross, it added a new element of mystery to the already unusual find. Sasha quickly shone his flashlight, illuminating the ground around the grave, and the friends speculated that it could be some kind of shroud for an animal, covered in dirt and dust from the time spent in the ground. Such assumptions seemed to them the most logical at that moment when they had to deal with the unexplained. After inspecting the grave, they decided to return to the car. Energized by jokes and conversation, the friends headed back to their vehicles, trying to push away thoughts of the mysterious artifact they had just discovered. But they were met with even more mysteries unfolding as time passed. A few days after this incident, the friends gathered again, but the meeting was not as cheerful and carefree as usual. Many of them began to experience sleep problems and nightmares. However, the most concerned was Misha, who constantly had the same terrifying dream about the found grave. In his dreams, the grave appeared much darker and more threatening to him than in real life. He saw how dark shadows enveloped him, making him feel fear and unease. This nightmare haunted him night after night, depriving him of rest and causing a sense of anxiety even upon waking. The friends began to realize that the discovery at the grave could have introduced something mysterious and inexplicable into their lives, leading to these strange and frightening dreams. But what exactly caused Misha to see these nightmares remained a mystery that they had to uncover. Sasha's suggestion of excavating the grave caused some tension among the friends. Although the idea seemed logical to make sure that it was an animal buried there, not a human, In order to rid themselves of the nightmares and sleep peacefully, they realized that it was an unusual and quite risky decision. However, the strange nightmares haunting Misha compelled them to act. Gathering their strength and deciding that this might be the only way to solve the mystery and find peace, the friends set to work. Sasha took on the role of leading the excavation. He used a flashlight to illuminate the area and a spade to carefully remove the top layer of soil. The friends worked in silence, focused on the task at hand, although there was some underlying worry and uncertainty in their hearts. Each dig was carefully made to avoid damaging the contents of the grave and preserve all possible clues. From time to time, they paused to switch or assess progress, but overall they moved forward, striving to unravel the mystery that remained hidden beneath the thick layer of earth. Finally, after hours of work, when the top layer of soil was removed, the friends breathed a sigh of relief. Before them lay an open grave, revealing part of its mysterious contents. But what would they find inside? That was the question they hoped to answer. Beneath the layer of soil that had so carefully concealed the secret of the grave, the friends discovered a shroud covering a body. Fear and horror gripped them as they realized it was the body of a person, more specifically a child. The gray color of the skin disrupted the peaceful presence here, in this secretive grave, and made the hearts of the friends skip a beat with horror. Questions raced through their minds: who could commit such a terrible act? And what was this place where such a horrible secret was hidden? The initial shock was strong, but then the friends realized the need to report the finding to the police. Misha was the first to voice this suggestion, choosing the path of reason and responsibility to bring justice to the place where it was so sorely needed. This step snapped them out of their stupor and compelled them to act. An hour after the call was made, the police arrived at the scene. The friends were taken to the station for overnight questioning. They were questioned individually at first, then together, trying to ascertain all the details and circumstances of this terrible discovery. The night turned into a torturous time of waiting and interrogation, but finally by morning the friends were released. This day left a deep mark on them, one that would forever change their lives. Receiving such shocking information from the investigator, the main character felt mixed feelings of astonishment and apprehension. It was impossible to remain indifferent to what could have happened to this little girl, and it seemed that the mystery surrounding her death only grew deeper and more mysterious. The absence of any missing children reports further complicated the picture, and the main character began to ponder the possible hidden aspects of this tragic story. 2 weeks after that, information about the body of a 9-year-old girl found appeared in the local newspapers. This was a new shock for the main character and his friends. Suddenly, that mysterious grave they discovered became part of the bitter reality, exposing the dark side of their small town. Gradually, the friends recovered from the shock they experienced, but the shadow of the past continued to haunt them. They returned to their normal lives, although they stopped visiting the site of the discovery, as the thought caused them too much pain and worry. Their relationships weakened due to work, family obligations, and heavy experiences. Along with these changes, the friends gradually drifted apart from each other, and now their bond was not as close as before. But despite this, they would always remember those moments when they faced darkness together and found strength in mutual support and friendship. The tragic changes in Artem's life left the friends in shock and puzzlement. He seemed to have lost himself completely, mired in alcohol and hopelessness. This new version of Artem was nothing like the cheerful and talented friend they once knew. He isolated himself from everyone, even from his brother Sasha, and spent days and nights in a dark apartment, consumed by his inner demons. Realizing that such a life would only lead Artem to self-destruction, Misha suggested gathering the old group and trying to reach out to their friend. The main characters, Sasha and Misha, agreed to this plan, resolving to try to bring Artem back to the life he once led. They went to Artem's house, filled with determination and hope for the best. However, upon arrival, they were met with an impenetrable wall of alienation. Artem did not want to see his friends, his voice filled with discontented grumbling, and he refused to open the door. But the friends didn't give up. Sasha and Misha persisted, urging him to return to life, and the main character made every effort to convey his words to his friend's heart. Eventually, after long and persistent attempts, Artem relented. The door opened, and they entered the apartment, where they were met with a frightening sight of destruction and despair. But thanks to the persistence of the friends, at that moment a spark of hope ignited that Artem might be able to return to life and find his way to healing. Upon meeting Artem, the friends realized that time had not been kind to him. He looked significantly older than his actual age. His face was swollen and haggard, emphasizing the negative consequences of his new lifestyle. The reddish stubble on his face and bald patches made him completely unrecognizable from the energetic and vibrant Artem they once knew. Artem's apartment reflected his decline. The smell of alcohol hung in the air, and the atmosphere was far from cozy. Unwashed items were scattered around the rooms, and dust and dirt had become the norm. Sasha, seeing this state, insisted on cleaning, expressing his concern for his friend. However, Artem seemed to pay no attention to it. His gaze was dull and his actions sluggish, as if he were in another world, detached from reality. This seriously alarmed the friends. Their hope of being able to return Artem to a normal life began to diminish. They realized that they faced a difficult task, and they would need a lot of effort and patience to help their friend return to the path of healing. When Artem shared his observations about the presence of a colorful cloth resembling a baby blanket with childish drawings, it caused confusion and concern among his friends. They looked at each other anxiously, wondering how this cloth could have ended up in Artem's apartment and what it could mean. Artem, recounting the discovery, looked tense and frightened. He confessed that when he saw this cloth, he remembered the grave and felt as if dark shadows were haunting him again. Fear engulfed him, and he decided that this cloth brought him misfortune. The fear of this object was so strong that Artem decided to get rid of it as quickly as possible. He didn't even try to figure out where it came from, preferring to simply remove it from his life. The friends watched as he hurriedly left the apartment, carrying the cloth with him, as if shedding a burden that weighed on his soul. For the friends, this was another sign of how much Artem's life had changed after they found that mysterious grave. It pushed them to understand that they were facing forces beyond their understanding, and that they needed to unite to resist these forces and help their friend return to a normal life. Artem described strange sounds coming from his neighbor's apartment, which seemed unusual and even suspicious to him. These sounds came at different times of day and night, sometimes sounding like whispers, sometimes like rustling, but they always filled him with a sense of unease and anxiety. In the context of the found cloth and other mystical events happening in his life, this added to his agitation. The consequences of these mystical events were much more serious than just anxiety and confusion. Artem began to suffer from panic attacks and post-traumatic stress disorder. Every time he heard those strange sounds from the neighboring apartment, his heart would start pounding, and his breathing would become heavy and erratic. Fear, doubt, and anxiety took hold of his mind, causing him to constantly check locks and windows, as if trying to protect himself from something unknown and sinister. These strange sounds became not only a source of concern for Artem but also a trigger, inducing panic attacks and memories of that dark and mysterious world he felt compelled to explore. Each day spent in this environment seemed like a battle, a cursed thread tying him to the past and forces he could not understand or control. The brothers couldn't remain indifferent to Artem's suffering. They made every effort to help him deal with the problem. They turned to a psychiatrist in hopes of finding professional help and support for Artem. The brothers also tried to be there for him, communicating and supporting him through difficult times. Despite all their efforts, the tragic events took their turn. Overwhelmed by constant stress and fear, Artem committed suicide. This was a profound blow to his brother Sasha and his surroundings. Sasha felt immense guilt and pain, feeling responsible for his brother's unhappiness despite all his efforts and care. Grief and sadness filled the house, which was once full of joy and laughter. The brothers lost not only a friend and brother but also a part of themselves. This tragedy left them broken and devastated, and now they had to seek a path to healing and reconciliation with the past. Sasha, consumed by suffering and guilt after his brother's death, became a victim of his own demons. He withdrew deep into himself, immersed in a world of darkness and despair. The mystical events described by Artem became an integral part of reality for him, remaining unexplained and frightening. One day, driven by panic and mangled emotions, Sasha committed a horrific act. He ruthlessly dealt with his family, using a spade. This act seemed truly insane, raising questions about the connection between his actions and the mystical phenomena described by Artem. However, the answer to this question remained unclear, shrouded in a veil of mysteries and uncertainties. The psychological aftermath of this event was devastating for Sasha. He felt overwhelming fear and anxiety about the future, afraid to be alone and experiencing dread at the thought of the tragedy repeating itself. Inside him, a dark storm of emotions raged, and he couldn't find solace or peace. He became withdrawn and isolated, unable to find a way out of the darkness that consumed his soul. Now he faced the task of overcoming his inner demons and finding a path to healing. But the road to this was difficult and tangled, and Sasha felt like he was lost in the dark labyrinth of his own fears and pain.